Hello, Maha. Welcome to the show.
Uh, Hi, Miriam. Thanks for having me.
I am curious and looking forward to what there is to emerge.
Same
And
here.
always start with the same question. When did you start calling yourself a facilitator? And actually, do you?
Yeah, I do. Not as my main job, but definitely as a thing that I do. And I will say that I think I was originally a computer scientist. I worked in the corporate world in the IT for a while, and I used to do trainings and things like that. I don't think I was using the term facilitator then. And then when I moved into education, into the same department I work at now, so I work at the Center for Learning and Teaching at the American University in Cairo. And I was just 2 years after graduation. I was just starting a master's degree in e-learning. And it was all about that phase in education, early 2000s, about a guide on the side and not the sage on the stage as an educational approach, right? And then I was really young and I was teaching people who were my professors 2 years ago. And so I think there was always this thing, if I'm giving them a workshop, I'm really more on the facilitation side, but I don't know that I used the term facilitator until in 2006. I took a facilitation training with an organization called Solia. So I don't know if you know about Solia, but it's an organization that does cross-cultural video conferencing dialogue between people in the Middle East and Arab region and people in the West and the US. And they were in their early stages, and I was learning how to facilitate online dialogue in 2006 when
Wow.
the internet was very weak, especially in Egypt, where Skype was new. And Talia had their own thing, but they called it facilitation. And then I realized what that was because I was not the teacher of these students.
Mhm.
I was just there to help the conversation along and help them have a good dialogue. And then that's a lot of my facilitation skills started then and calling myself that and then realizing that that's also what I was when I became a teacher myself and in a lot of other spaces. I give workshops obviously a lot as well.
Beautiful. And I would love to hear more of how has the sophistication in tech actually impacted the way you facilitate? Because back in the day, Skype, I mean, nobody uses Skype anymore. I don't know if some of the listeners might not even know Skype. And still, it was, yeah, the video conferencing tool that we would use.
Yes, so this is very interesting actually because now you're reminding me of something. I think at a point Skype was only audio and it wasn't video. And I remember back at that time, I used to have meetings with people synchronously where all we did was just chat, text, and that was like considered like a cool thing too. There were like some of the early, there were lots of early tools. Like I did with my PhD research, I did Skype and MSN Messenger, and I don't think MSN Messenger exists anymore even, but or maybe it might, I don't know. But I'll tell you a breaking, not a breaking point, but a big shift in the way I facilitate online video conferencing type things was when Zoom came out. And the difference was I used to do something called virtually connecting, which I'm sure we'll talk about again soon. We used Google Hangouts on Air. That's not here anymore, but it used to be similar to Google Meet, I guess. But it had a limit of 10 people
Mm.
if you wanted to live stream something onto YouTube directly. And for the thing that we were doing, the live streaming was so important. So we dealt with the 10-person limit. And eventually we thought the 10-person limit was good because if you had more than 10 people, you couldn't really have a good conversation, or not everybody would get a chance to speak. And then Zoom came, and Zoom was nice. It wasn't free the way the Google Hangouts on Air was free, but the first 40 minutes was free and you could just restart it again and whatever. And then you started to see people who had Zoom that had the paid version and they had breakout rooms. And then at first, the breakout room thing was really uncomfortable when someone just threw you into a breakout room for a certain number of minutes and then you threw you back in and you get lost and all of that. But then when the pandemic happened, and my organization bought Zoom and I could have the breakout room functionality and I could play with it and I learned how to use it well. That was a game changer for me because then I could do a workshop with 200 people just fine, very interactive. I was just telling my husband the other day, oh yeah, I have a meeting with 100 people. He's like, oh, that's not gonna be boring. I'm like, no, it's gonna be very interactive. He's like, how's it gonna be interactive? And I started to explain to him. He's like, oh, you're not interacting with them. I'm like, yeah, they're interacting with each other. That's what interactive means. He's a
And
university
that's what
professor. And
facilitation means instead of it's a beautiful
exactly.
bridge, especially in contrast to education or training, or at least what it used to be, as you
Hmm.
described it.
Yeah. Exactly. And then it's not only video conferencing technology too, right? I think the polling technology also helps a lot.
Mm.
So in the past, we used to have these clickers. You had to have the hardware for it and you had to attach it to a certain device. It was really complicated to get it to work, I remember. And now there are these tools and they work on your phone and there's so many of them and they have so many different styles, I think. And those are particularly helpful when you have a huge number of people. And it's great for hybrid because, when we get used to being online, we use the chat and we rely on that so much. And then, oh, face to face, I can't hear from everyone. But polling tools can allow you to ask open-ended questions and word cloud questions. I think word clouds are like a big deal for me as well. And another thing I love is the upvoting with Q&A. Because
Mm.
one of the things I don't like about anything where people ask each other questions or ask the facilitator or presenter questions is that the first brave person who just speaks first gets to ask the question first, even though it may not be relevant to anyone else. But with upvoting, you give everyone time to stop and think.
And
And then people vote, and then you answer the most popular questions, not the first question.
it is so true. Also, the first question that's being asked out loud basically sets the tone.
For what comes next. That's
And then
true.
you have a certain dynamic in the space. Um,
Mm.
if, in contrast, you're giving a little bit of time to put all the questions in and then upvote,
Mm.
there's a little more time to settle and to really think
It's a great
about
point.
where the conversation wants to go.
I
And
don't
I
think I'd
re-
thought of that before, even though now that you say it, it makes sense. But it hadn't occurred to me before.
yeah. And what I recently only found out is a tool called Stream Alive that scans the chat and pulls out all the questions and puts them
Wow.
onto a screen that the facilitator can then share and does the same
It's
with,
really cool.
yeah, tell me where you're dialing in from. Everyone puts in their countries or their cities, and it will automatically put it on the world map.
That is really cool.
Right? And
Yeah,
five
that's much
minutes
cooler
ago, we
than
were
a word
talking about Skype.
clouds. I'll tell you what else I discovered just last week, and then I used it yesterday in a session.
Never
Question
done it.
Jam, have you seen this?
No?
So what I love about Question Jam, so we did the Q&A thing, fine, whatever, the facilitators responded. But then we did Question Jam, where you let everyone into this thing for 7 minutes. For some reason, they make it work for 7 minutes, and it's just enough, honestly. Everybody asks questions to one other person in the session. So actually, what happens is you can ask in 7 minutes, you could ask like 10 questions, and they're going to get answered by someone and you will answer someone else's question. So basically, what you're doing is you're asking questions, sending them off to someone. You may or may not know who they are, but you choose someone else who's in the session and they respond to you. So you get to see their responses and you get to get questions from them.
I love that just because it's so democratic and it flattens the room. I
Yeah.
once read someone speaking about the Q&A sessions on LinkedIn, and it really resonated, saying that we're having a room full of people, and as facilitators, we believe that the wisdom is in the space and in the room already, so it's not us. So, and then suddenly we have a Q&A where we have the monopoly on all the answers and
Yeah,
ignoring all the other experts in the space. So I think
exactly.
to democratize the Q&A and to just distribute it is genius. And
Exactly. And I think in like teaching, it would be a way for students to
oh
ask things
yes,
they're curious about and respond to each other. Let's see what their first reactions to these things are.
and then filter out those questions that only answer those questions that they couldn't answer themselves.
That's a great idea too. It
This is
creates a
very
word cloud for
empowering for
you.
students.
Definitely. And it creates a word cloud, by the way, at the end for the facilitator. Everyone can get the whole question data set to their email. but the facilitator also gets a word cloud of the most commonly used words. And then
Mm.
if you click on the word, you get to see all the questions and answers that had that word in it.
So the question and answers, it's all typed, or would people also be in a
Typed,
dialogue with each other?
typed. No, it's all typed. Because I mean, online, I guess it could be some different, but if it was face to face, it would be really noisy.
Oh
How
yeah.
would you send stuff
Yeah.
to? Like I did it yesterday with 40 something people. Actually, we had more than 100 people in the room, but for this, we split it. Me and the other facilitator, each one of us had a different code for people to join. So there
Mm.
were like two groups of 50-ish, a bit less than 50, 40 something. But yeah,
It's
written.
it's funny how we are now more sensitive to the noise in the space because we are so used to Zoom and
And
the
mute.
calm and the isolation of the breakout rooms.
Oh, but so this is very interesting that you said that. So when I do something like, a liberating structure called Mad Tea, we call it Wild Tea now, but it's where you put people in pairs very quickly for 1 minute. They answer a prompt, they come back, they go again with another pair, like
It's
speed
like
networking
impromptu
or speed
networking.
dating. It's similar to that. Yeah, similar,
Mhm,
but with different prompts each time with
mhm,
two people usually, but I do it with three. But anyway, when you do it online, you can tell people are energized, and when you're in it, you're energized. But when you do it in a room and you hear the noise, you feel the energy. It's a
mm.
completely different level of facilitation and sensing the room. This is one of the things about online facilitation and hybrid, even more difficult to just sense how people are feeling when their cameras are off and they're in a breakout room. Now, Zoom actually allows you to see who's speaking in the breakout rooms. I don't know
Yeah.
if you noticed that. And
Yes,
that's really
I like
interesting
that.
because I'm always interested in domination and who takes over. And then one of the things I noticed is that sometimes everyone in the room is talking at the same time. And I think that's laughter. That's my interpretation of what that must be. Like, how is everyone in a room of like three or four talking at the same time? They must be laughing, right?
True, true. No,
I
and I
assume.
actually I like this air quote spying option because I, as a facilitator, and I work only with adults, I would never go into a breakout room
Mm.
because I cannot knock and I don't know what I'm falling into, and this is their space. And still,
Knocking would be nice. They should
right?
add knocking.
Yeah,
Right, yeah, they should. There's no way to send a message to one room and ask, can I come in? They'd have to come back to you if they need you, but yeah, that's
yeah.
a good point. So you wouldn't go into the
So
rooms.
I wouldn't go into the room. And still, with the option now, I can see if there's only one person speaking all the time, I would just send a broadcast to all. Please remember that everyone shall speak. And if you
Yeah,
haven't
that's a good
switched yet,
idea.
now is the good moment. And then it's kind of a teaser
Yeah,
or a
yeah, that's a
poking
good point.
um, without
So
being
there's
dominant.
without being intrusive and singling anyone out. I love that. I'm going to do that. What I usually do, because I teach also students, and I do need to sort of make sure they're on task and on track, and also because sometimes you have a huge number of people and you don't have time for everyone to share out, is that
Mhm.
I give them a shared space to write. So things like Google Slides, that was a game changer. Google Docs and Google Slides and Jamboard, and of course Mural and Miro, but I don't use Mural and Miro a lot because I think people who aren't used to them, it can really turn them off the first time. I know that the second time they'll love it, but I can't take the risk most of the time that the first time will turn someone off and then I won't be able to get them again.
And I think it's sometimes it's shooting with Kalashnikovs on flies.
So I don't understand what that is, but I think
Um,
you're saying it's more than you need.
yes, thank you.
I
Um,
get what you're saying. Sometimes
politically.
a Jamboard is enough. Yeah.
And it's because, and why I'm saying that is if you open a mirror board, very quickly the entire group is absorbed on the board and they're not paying attention to each other. And very quickly, especially the introverted one gets very silent. And then suddenly you have
Mm.
a breakout group of four, and they could have a conversation, but instead they're just typing and moving sticky notes around. Or they're spending the time to discuss about the tech. Whereas if you have, so if you're just collecting ideas and you don't need the sorting and the clustering and the hiding and all of that, I think just a Google Doc
Yeah,
Jamboard is
I
just,
agree. Yeah, the simplest technology for what you need, simplest for purpose, I think, is always
Yeah.
the right thing to do. Unless you have a particularly innovative group that want to tinker, there's really no need to, to overwhelm them with technology.
Or if it's a longer project. So what I
Yeah,
enjoy about these online whiteboards, and I love Miro, is that the sticky notes don't fall off the wall and the workshop space is always open. So
yeah,
everyone
that
can
is
go back
true.
whenever they want, they can continue to work with it, and the sticky notes will be there even in a month from now. And we can
Yeah,
continuously build on what we've done before.
yeah. And you can zoom in and out and view things. And when it's done well, it's really, really good.
Yeah.
When it's done well. But if it's just a one-off, very quick thing with teams that aren't going to keep working together or whatever,
Yeah,
yeah, it's too
I
much.
agree. And you mentioned this project that you wanted to speak about,
Virtually connecting.
virtually connecting
Yeah.
2015.
Yes. So this started. So what it is, it's a grassroots movement whose purpose is to broaden access to conferences. And now we say challenge academic gatekeeping because we realized we did more than access, challenge academic gatekeeping at academic conferences. So it started out, the idea is to bring people who can't go to a conference virtually into a conference, but not to watch the presentations, but to have those, hallway water cooler conversations that happen. This is the real, this is where the meat of the conference is. This is where the networking
And this is
is.
why
That's the
people
most
go to
important.
conferences.
That's the most important thing. Like whatever they're saying in their presentation, I could watch it on YouTube later. They've probably written a blog post or an article on it. I can read that. But what's happening in between? And so it started out that there was a particular conference that I wanted to go to. My daughter was very young. We couldn't go. I couldn't take her with me. I couldn't go without her. And I had several papers at the conference, and there were ways to bring me in virtually. It was a hybrid conference anyway. But a lot of my friends were going to be there, my friends internationally that I've been working with on Twitter and on articles and stuff. And so and I was on the organizing committee even, and I was responsible for the unconference with someone else. I was responsible for the virtual unconference. And so one of my friends, her name is Rebecca Hoke. She's my co-founder for Virtually Connecting. She was a PhD student at the time. And she said, I'll bring you in. I'll be your buddy. I'll bring you in on my laptop or my phone and you can talk to people. And because I was also in the organizing committee, instead of just talking to people and just saying hi, we're like, oh, does anybody else want to join? Let's put it on Twitter. Do you want to join? I'll send you a link and you can join us. And so we started using Google Hangouts on Air to record and live stream these conversations. And the people who were there were keynote speakers, other speakers, just people who are participating, who know me, who want to see me, that I want to see. And it started to be these really fun conversations like, what's going on at the conference? Not a
So,
particular theme or topic.
so if I understand you correctly, there was your partner Rebecca would basically walk around with or would have a laptop at the live
Mm-hmm.
event and would
Yeah.
invite some of the speakers and some of the other participants to join those who were connecting virtually,
Yeah,
remotely.
exactly.
Beautiful.
Exactly. So me and others
Yeah.
who wanted to join, you want to talk to Miriam today, come with me. And so this happened. We did a lot of sessions that first time, and we thought it was just a one-off thing. And then everybody's like, "When are you going to do this again?" And we're like, "Oh, really?" And then someone was like, "Oh, well, this is a very specific thing related to Maha and Rebecca and their relationship, and nobody would do that for anyone." But you know what? People started volunteering. You're like, I'm going to this conference. Do you want to do? It wasn't called Virtually Connecting, by the way, at the beginning. It was called ET4 Buddy. And then people kept saying, keep doing this, keep doing this. We need this. But what started to happen was, first of all, the community of volunteers willing to be on site buddies and virtual buddies started to grow. And then at first, we used to train people technically on how to use the technology of Google Hangouts, how to put a blog post on the site, how to register people. But it grew into something else completely. We started to have a Slack team with channels for different conferences. And then Slack is really good too, because a conference could be a channel and only the people involved in that one would go. And then you archive it when you're done. But you
Yeah.
keep working on other things. And we grew a lot. And we had Autumn Keynes became a really instrumental person because one time Rebecca and I finally went to a conference in person. And Rebecca and I were both at that conference. So we needed someone virtually to handle the entire virtual side. And so Autumn Keynes stepped up. She was our friend and she was one of our volunteers. She stepped up and she organized the process for us. And the process kept evolving. But what happened eventually was that we were told and we realized, as we did research and talked to each other and others, it wasn't just about access, it was about how the virtual folks are usually marginalized in some way. They're from the global south, they're women with young children, they're single parents, they're disabled, they're early career and they don't have funding to travel, they're students. And so we started to realize it wasn't just that we were giving access, we were actually changing the conversations that were happening at conferences in a hybrid way. And
Mm.
people who were very high profile people were able to listen to what these others had to say. And then being part of a community like this, a growing community like this, on and off and on and off, you stayed as part of the academic discourse in ways that you had been excluded before because you were never at those conferences.
And,
So they thought of you at times that they couldn't see you, but they saw you online and you became a part of it.
and what I find fascinating, so thank you for sharing that, and the evolution of the project, especially even if these groups that you just described, the marginalized, they would not be those who raise their hand and speak at these conferences.
They would never go up to a keynote speaker and sit with them over coffee for 20
Exactly.
minutes or 30 minutes.
Exactly.
Even the on-site buddies who were at the conference would say, well, I'm shy, but because I know I have a virtually connecting
Yes.
session with this person, I
Have
could go up
permission.
to him and say, hi, I'm this person. We have an appointment at this time. So we started to be more organized about that. We also started to develop this intentionally equitable hospitality notion. And we called it this after we'd been practicing it for a while, which is, first of all, recognize the power differences between the virtual and the hybrid and the online, the virtual and the on-site. Recognize other kinds of power dynamics. The keynote speaker is a high-profile person. They're not here to present, they're here to talk. So you don't let them dominate the conversation. So both the on-site buddy and the virtual buddy, each of them was caring for the people around them. So you always had someone focused with the virtual folks, which I think for hybrid is so important. But to have a partner on site as well who has the same ethos and who cares and they connect with each other to make sure that everyone's voice is heard, make sure that no white man dominates a conversation in the way that white men just tend to speak normally, you know, prioritizing others, making sure that people who were virtual were participating on their own terms. They wanted to have their cameras on or off. They wanted to chat or speak, all of that. And also, what is a thing that I think very few people know is that the invisible aspects of virtually connecting are more important than the visible aspects that end up on our YouTube channel. It's the way we invite people to join, because when you say anyone can join, the white men come in, but the women are too shy. The people from the global south, they don't know that being invited. You have to go and welcome them personally. You go up to Miriam and say, Miriam, by the way, I would love to have you here. And I still do this in my life, and it makes a huge difference, especially for women and minorities. And the other elements are before you go live, you email people and you tell them, I'll be there 15 minutes early if you want to pop in, get your technology checked, get this makes such a huge difference. And people who would come early would be more comfortable as soon as we went live. And then after we finish, there has to be like an after session of like 10, 15 minutes where we're not recording. And some people would be quiet the entire time we're recording. And as soon as the recording is off, they're chatty, chatty, chatty. And, you know, if people do this often enough, these people who are often young and inexperienced and so on eventually became our volunteers who would lead, you know?
Yeah.
And so it's so important. And this during the pandemic, people would just start a Zoom meeting, end a Zoom meeting, come on time, leave on time, because we had so many meetings in a row. But that with virtual, it makes so much of a difference.
Yeah. And now I understand why you call it hospitality, because it is the art of hosting, that you're there to welcome people as they drop in. And also in the physical space, there are certain persons who enjoy coming a little bit early because they might be shy and they want to connect to the host and to the space to make themselves comfortable and to be there and to welcome them and with their name and just to be there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Would
important.
you ever, if you're hosting something in person, arrive exactly on time? No, if you're the host, you arrive early,
Yeah.
right? I
Yeah.
hope.
Yeah, you prepare the
Uh,
space.
and you don't leave as soon as the thing is over. You stay in case someone needs to tell you something on their way out, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, these small moments of in between the liminal spaces
Yeah.
are under underrepresented in the online space.
Oh, yeah. So I don't know if I've ever told you about the phases of intentionally equitable hospitality. So this came later. Like we started talking about the phases of intentionally equitable hospitality like very recently, like last year.
So just one
Breaking
second
down what it is we do. Yeah.
to make the connection. So if I understand it correctly, you started with this virtually connected hybrid
Connecting.
setting, and then from there you had more and more volunteers who would help you with the setup, and hence you structured it and formalized it in a sort of theory.
Yeah, you could say that. Praxis. So
Praxis.
praxis
Yeah.
with an
Praxis,
X,
I like
yeah?
that. Yeah.
Yeah, so praxis with the meaning, in case people don't know with the term, it means practice with theory or practice with reflection. So we do something, but we're constantly reflecting on what we're doing. It's not like we do it and we go, we reflect on it along the way. I don't know if theory is the right word. I wouldn't call it theory, but yeah, praxis.
Praxis is nice.
And
Thank you.
yeah. And so what happened during the pandemic is everything became fully online, but we realized that what we were learning doing virtually connecting wasn't just the digital skills of doing video conferencing, but it was this art of hosting online, right? And so we were like, oh, that's actually also the way we can teach now. That's actually the way we can do online workshops. Because, oh my God, people were so bad at doing online workshops, right? But we weren't. We were really good at it. And then with breakout rooms, that was a different thing that what virtually connecting was. Like the 10 people limit was so fundamental to our ability to focus with people. But with Zoom and the breakout rooms and all the other stuff, we started to develop the practice differently. And then we realized, you know what, this applies to every gathering, right? And so we developed some community building resources, which we can share with people. And the idea was, as you develop a resource to help people develop community online, you should also remember the inequities in your audience. So if I tell you, do this and this and this with breakout rooms, okay, but if you don't have Zoom and you don't have breakout rooms, here's another way you can do it. Or if you can't meet your students synchronously, then here's how to do it asynchronously. Or if your students don't have their cameras on, here's how to adapt this activity so that it would work. And so we did that. And we're like, oh, yeah, we're designing these resources, not just to give people an idea, but to also give the idea with intentionally equitable hospitality, both in the way we're offering it to the facilitator or teacher who's going to use it, and also having them be mindful of how their students might be disadvantaged. You know, what if you have a student who's blind? What if you have a student who can't turn their camera on because they have privacy issues and all that? And so we then developed this 4-phase model for intentionally equitable hospitality. And I think, again, I recently gave a talk to an audience that had never heard me talk about it ever before. And they were so amazed by the pre-design phase. There is an in-between phase, which is the one you were talking about. That's the fourth one that we talk about. But the pre-design is about who do you even involve in the design of what you're going to do? What do you read about the topic? Do you only read white Western scholars? Do you read around? Do you know what people of color are saying about this? Do you know what LGBTQ people are saying about this? Who do you involve in the co-facilitation or in the design of your work? Or who do you talk to get ready for the work? So someone was saying recently, sometimes you're invited to facilitate for a group, but the person who's inviting you doesn't represent that group. They're their boss and that's the person you meet to prepare, but you don't actually know what the others are going to say. You don't know what they're like. So that's something. So recently, we actually facilitated an intentionally equitable hospitality series, which was a 3-day session. And to run the session, I could run it alone, totally. But instead of running it alone, I had a blind undergraduate student. I had a Kenyan facilitator who is not in education. And I had 2 American educators, one of color, one LGBTQ, one in a community college, one in a regular university, and me here from Egypt. So that combination of 5 people gave you insight. I didn't have to think, what would a blind person want? I had a blind person with me. How would an undergraduate feel? I have an undergraduate. He doesn't represent every blind person or every undergrad, right? My Kenyan facilitator doesn't represent the entire global South, but that representation in who is involved in the first place already changes your perspective on what you're doing.
Because everyone looks at the design process and joins this project with their lens and their specific
exactly. So it's recognizing the limitations
and the kind of responsibility to represent
and the responsibility to represent. And of course it won't always be possible, but you can take opinions of people even if you can't bring them in with you for every single thing. And if you surround yourself with a diverse circle, then you're always hearing that kind of perspective, and it influences just the person you are and how you think and what perspectives you center when you think about that.
And I mean, that's amazing. And I can only imagine what you learn, take away in terms of also personal growth from an interaction, co-facilitation with such a diverse group. How do you, because I can also sense that it's a challenge, because everyone comes in with their own agenda, with their own lens, with their own wording, with their own way of doing things and believe how things have to be done. So what were maybe the main challenges and how you overcame them to run a project in such a diverse group?
That's a great point. So that applies to virtually connecting. It applies to equity unbound, which is another thing I'll talk about later. It applies to every situation where you bring in diversity, because diversity is hard work. It's not, we don't celebrate diversity. Sorry?
That's why people tend to avoid it.
I know. But it's also funny, like, oh, let's celebrate that we have diversity. No, let's work hard to make this diversity work and keep checking that it's working, because it might work a little and then it'll go bad, because you need to. That's where the fourth phase is important. It's the in-between. It's the amount of time and effort and attention you give to building community that makes you know who from this community is the person that would work for this thing. You get to know the community so well that you can choose the right person to co-facilitate something with you. And sometimes I can do this really quickly, like this building a relationship. And sometimes it takes a long time, but obviously the longer you know someone, the better your choices will be and the more aligned you will be when you start to work together. And also sometimes you're working with them, but there's also this element of labor, and you don't want to put too much effective labor on someone. And so always to be clear on, okay, you're welcome to do this much, but if you want to do less, let me know. Or if you want to, like in that particular one, we had some people help with one session, but not another, like have a back role in another session. And we went up and down and who wants to do this and that. And sometimes I'd have a meeting with one of them. Sometimes we'd all meet together. It would depend on that. We'd have an after session, which when you're on your own, you just reflect on your own. But with others, you need to stop and reflect with your team, right?
Yeah.
And oh, where are we going to communicate? Oh, we'll do WhatsApp group. We'll do whatever. So there's all of those elements of that. And also knowing, okay, if something goes wrong, what are we going to do in the session, during the session when something goes wrong? And that happens all the time. So that's why the debrief is so important. So yeah, so that's the fourth phase of the sustaining community equitably in between, and not just with facilitators, but with participants, potential participants to your community.
Yeah.
So that you know them and you know what they want and sense what they need, and you have an open channel for them to say what they need or what they're thinking. Or you just observe their interactions in a space like Slack or some semi-synchronous space. You have a beautiful space as well for NDB, and the meeting innovation community, they have a nice space as well. But for me, Slack is the notifications are helpful. So that's for me a good place to be. And it's also a place for them to divide up into different interest areas. So that's the in-between space. But then there are the two things in the middle that everyone knows, the design and the facilitation, right? So when you design, if you're doing it with intentionally equitable hospitality, remind yourself of your intention for equity. And then ask yourself in what ways the thing that you're trying to do might reproduce inequalities. How can you redress that? What can you predict? What kind of inequalities can you anticipate could happen so that you can try to redress them? Kind of like, I'll say, generally for teaching undergraduate students in Egypt, you can predict that they may not want to turn their camera on. You can predict that some people will have slow internet. How do you modify an activity with breakout rooms? And I would say, oh yeah, I'll put them in groups of 3 or 4 instead of 2 because one might drop off. I'll have a breakout room in the main room because some people cannot at all go to breakout rooms. I will ask them to put a photo instead of open their camera. I'll ask them to meet outside of class to do this thing because we can't do it in class. All of those things that you keep in mind in order to not reproduce inequality or to at least try to bring in some equity are things you can do in the design phase up to an extent, right? To a big extent, like maybe 80% or something. But then the facilitation. And everyone who's a good facilitator. Sorry, yes.
Before we come to the facilitation, so I can imagine this body of knowledge that you have acquired. I assume that you have a sort of database or a checklist, because you don't have to repeat the same work every time, right? So I think for, as you said, for some groups, you know exactly what's coming. So
I
how do
think it's in
you
my
manage
head. I think
knowledge
it's in my head.
sharing
No, I
and
think it's
knowledge
in my
sharing?
head. I think it's in my head and it's incremental, but I see where you're going there, and I should probably do a resource like that.
Yeah, because
We've
it's
been
for
trying
knowledge
to.
management, I think there's so many worldwide who don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Great point. Yeah, we should. I mean, yeah, it's very interesting that you brought that up. I mean, it's all there somewhere, and in the articles it exists somewhere, but there's no neat. It's not a neat kind of knowledge,
Mm,
right? But it's multi-layered, but you can choose which layers to put in and take out depending on the audience.
yeah. And it
So,
reminds me of a conversation I had with Marie Dubost, who's also in
mhm,
NDB, about accessibility. And it's
yes,
similar accessibility and equity. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it anymore.
yeah, exactly, definitely. And accessibility, though, has so many dimensions, right? Are you trying to be
What I
accessible
learned
to a
from
blind person or a deaf person or someone with ADHD or someone with autism or whatever that is?
yeah,
So I'm much better at accessibility for someone who's visually impaired because of my relationship with this
mm,
particular student who was my friend before he was my student, but who also, not everyone who's disabled wants to be that person who teaches you,
yeah,
right? So you need to find that person who's willing to teach you, or do the hard work of trying to discover these things.
yeah. I
But
think,
yeah, this is definitely needed in all spaces, education and facilitation everywhere.
and then we come to the facilitation bit.
Yeah, and then the facilitation bit is always there will be a surprise that you didn't predict. And you need to do what Adrienne Marie Brown in emergent strategy calls intentional adaptation. It's like remember what your intention is and adapt in the moment to what needs to be done right then and there. And good facilitators, that's what they do. That's the difference between a facilitator and everyone else. It's
Mm,
this
yeah.
adaptation. And also, though, the one that is tricky and that people forget about is something Priya Parker calls generous authority. And a
Mm,
lot of times facilitators are like, oh, I'm going to step back so that you guys can have a discussion. That's not going to happen. Someone will be more powerful. Someone will dominate. Someone can spoil it for everyone else. So you need to use your authority as a facilitator. You need to recognize the power that you have and not pretend that by stepping back, you're giving it to them, and figure out how to use it for the good of especially the most marginalized or the furthest from justice. Right. So a lot of times in a Q&A or whatever, once someone starts talking, if they're a white man, they will talk for a long time. And so you need to figure out how to limit that. And in some spaces, it's really, really hard to do that step without being rude. But I mean, what I'm known for with virtually connecting intentionally equitable hospitality is I will stand up to especially white men in particular ways just to make sure that we make room for other people. And I think that's important.
and would you brief them beforehand so to make them aware? Because I think it's also with a pre-design,
Yeah.
you can brief them and make them aware that this is most
Yeah.
likely to happen and this is how you're
Right.
going to react to
Right.
that.
Right. So first of all, you can have community guidelines at the beginning of a session. That's really important. If it's a longer term type of engagement, you can co-create the community guidelines with the audience. You can actually start co-creating it before you ever meet them on a Google Doc and let them comment. Or you can bring them into the session and bring people to talk about it. If it's a longer engagement, this tends to work better. And then you have the in-betweenness that helps develop that
Mm.
kind of thing. But if it's a very short session, sometimes, but we've forgotten to keep doing it. But sometimes at the beginning, we say, we're going to run this session with intentionally equitable hospitality, and this means 1, 2, 3. And so I may do this. If you speak, please do not speak for longer than X. When you go to breakout rooms, please be a good host yourself because I'm not going to be there. Make sure you give equal time, whatever. It depends. It can be very paternalistic. What's the word? Yeah,
Yeah.
it can be offensive to say that to adults sometimes. But the truth is, they don't.
Yes, and I think
But you need to set the tone in a way that isn't offensive and not make them feel like they're children.
if you're saying it to everyone without judgment,
Yeah,
so and I
true.
love how you phrase it. Remember to be a good host to yourself because I won't be there. And
Yeah,
I think it's a very kind way of saying that, to just
mm,
reminding them. And then you have the best intentions. We all have the best intentions. And I think some get so carried away because they're so enthusiastic that they cannot stop speaking. So yeah, it's fantastic that they're so enthusiastic about the topic, and we want
Yeah.
them to be mindful that there are also other people.
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes, you know what I do sometimes with breakout rooms that helps with some of those. I'll tell you a couple of issues. One issue is that I learned once that there was a session with educators and students. And when you put them in breakout rooms, what ended up happening is that there were two educators in a breakout room with students, and the two educators know each other from before and they hadn't seen each other in a while. So you can guess what happened, right?
Mhm.
They just spent the whole time catching up and ignoring the students whose cameras were off. So the students
And
didn't,
they're so
fine,
used to
whatever.
that. It's
Yeah.
a dynamic they're used to and they fall
Yeah,
into.
yeah, exactly. So what we started to do was we have a particular activity we want to do. Before we do the activity, we're going to send you to breakout rooms to say hi. If you know each other, say hi. If you don't know each other, introduce yourself so it's not awkward. 5 minutes, whatever amount of time makes sense for the group size. Then come back and we'll tell you what the instructions are for the activity. So it's recognizing humanity, right? And people appreciate this so much.
I love that. And by breaking it down, you time box. Okay, this is how
Mhm.
much time you have to say hi.
Yeah,
And then you're less afraid of this moment where you're waiting for the breakout room with whom will I be?
yeah,
Yeah, I
exactly.
like that to break that down or to split it. And what
Yeah.
I also realized is it helps to give very clear instructions on the process. Okay, you're going
Mhm.
to a breakout room, and then the person who was born early in the year, the youngest, the oldest, shorter hair, longer hair, who ate tomatoes
Yeah.
for the last time will
Yeah.
start.
Yeah.
And
I
then
do that sometimes to help them because otherwise some people are so polite that nobody wants to start out
exactly.
of politeness.
And then especially with student when you have a power hierarchy, I would say okay, the younger starts or the older starts, depending on how I sense that the person starting will set the tone or not.
Yeah. I think, you know what I think it is? I think if it's a note of asking someone to be vulnerable, you start with the more powerful person sharing.
Yes.
But if it's a note of something more positive, then I would start with the younger person sharing and split it
Yes.
up sometimes. So I was thinking about something that I did recently. I was doing a liberating structure called appreciative interviews, where you just interview someone about a good thing, right? And we were trying to make sure it was a student and the professor together. And I think I heard later that some of the professor just overtalked. And what I could have done is the first 5 minutes, you're going to go, the student's going to talk, then you're going to come back, and then
Mhm.
you're going to go, and the professor's going to talk.
Yeah.
Not take 10 minutes and split it between you and just assume that they'll be mature enough to
Yes.
handle it, which is what I usually do if they have equal power.
Yeah.
But the power differences change the way you conduct an activity because you're trying to be very cognizant of these power dynamics.
And I think it's a very nice use of the superpowers of the facilitator in Zoom.
Yeah,
We do
exactly.
have the opportunity to just close the rooms, bring people back, and thereby have
Exactly.
closure to a conversation and then start it
Yeah.
again. And
Much
I
harder in person, obviously.
exactly, yeah, almost impossible. And I have also done it if I would be with the entire, if it's a small group, go with the entire group to a breakout room for time boxed session and then come back because there's something about going to another room, even if it's virtually, it changes the dynamic
Yeah, I like that a lot. That's funny.
because you have this
Yeah.
moment of black screen and Zoom working, and then oh, nice to see you again. Always a smile. Yeah.
I agree. Sometimes one of the things related to generous authority and intentional adaptation that, as you were saying this, made me think about it is things like when you decide as the facilitator how much time something's going to have, that's a lot of power you have.
Mhm.
And sometimes when I'm doing something like the mad tea, which we now called wild tea, is if they keep saying that was too short, I will give them more time for the next one, or I'll do it in the chat just to make sure I'll remove a prompt and give
Mhm.
them more time on a prompt
Interesting.
than go with my agenda, right?
Interesting. When when the groups come back and say, "Oh, there wasn't enough time," I laugh and say, "Yes," and that shows that I think it's the most beautiful thing that can happen. I mean,
Yeah.
it depends on the conversation. So for impromptu network, mad tea, crazy tea, however we want to call it, where it's really just to get to know each other and to create maybe a small bond, maybe some curiosity. I think what you want is that they come back and say, there wasn't enough time. Because this means that there is something that they're still interested in and they couldn't get it. This means that they will put their full attention into the space because now they have a friend that they're really interested in.
Right.
If there's just this epsilon too much time, you have this pause, but like, and now what? And then you have this one person, oh, let me just quickly check my emails. And then this person is lost. And
Right.
and it breaks the atmosphere and creates this solitude that
I
I
see
think
what you
can
mean.
break an entire session.
So there's two things I would say to this. The second thing is sometimes I say if you finish early, come back. And that will give me a sense that if a lot of people are coming back, then okay, fine. Or they'll come back and we'll talk until everybody else comes back. And so that's something I do sometimes when I'm not sure. I've not done this before with this kind of audience. I'm not sure if this is too much time. So I'll tell them come back when you're done. And also if they're doing things on Google Slides or whatever, and I can see that they've stopped typing or whatever, that could be a thing. But the other thing is sometimes they say we didn't have enough time because not everyone got a turn.
Mm.
And especially when the people don't all speak the same native language, they may speak whatever second language at different speeds. And so whatever makes sense for a native speaker audience is different for a non-native. Actually, even native speakers. You're in Australia right now, right? So Americans tend to speak faster than Australians and Irish people for some reason. Like there are particular activities that I've tried, and Australians tend to need more time. That was just every time I did it with an Australian or New Zealand audience, they felt like no, they needed more time. And I feel like they speak slower. I don't
Interesting.
know.
Maybe they reflect more.
I don't know. I hadn't thought of that. But definitely with non-native speakers, it's
Yeah.
they need to absorb the prompt. And this very quick fire type of activity can be disadvantaging for them. The other thing I always try to do is a balance between something very reflective and slow and something very fast and energizing because I like both. I need both. I need the energizing more than I need the reflecting, but I shouldn't be reflecting my style and my preferences on the participants. And I can't assume that all of them like the same thing. So, like, even my undergraduate students, some of them prefer the small group discussion, some prefer the larger group discussion. I try to do both.
Yeah.
I asked them if they all said they prefer one, I'll go with that. But if some of them prefer one and the other, and others prefer the other, then I need to just integrate both.
And also I think that so definitely plus one, they're different personality types we have to accommodate. And it seems that if we give some time for self-reflection before, those who tend to speak a lot, they or the speak, so I would consider myself a speak to thinker. I'm making sense of what's going on in my brain by speaking it out. So sometimes I can just go into blubbering, and after 10 minutes of blubbering, I'm like, oh, now I understand what I wanted to say.
Yeah, yeah.
But maybe not
I'm
everyone
like
wants
that
to
too.
listen to that. So if I had some time to actually make up my thoughts beforehand,
Yeah, yeah. Process.
yeah.
Yeah. And then yeah, that 1 minute or 2 minutes of reflection before you ask someone to speak makes a huge difference. And I always tell people they're more reflective, shy. Some people have told me that the people who are different than myself is that as soon as people start talking, they stop thinking. They can't think their own thoughts anymore because they're listening. And they say, well, by the time I've gotten the courage to speak, everybody's already said what I wanted. And so definitely giving everybody a chance to think and write on their own. Talk in a small group before they have to talk in a larger group.
Always.
That's just huge. And this is like very heavily used in facilitation and in teaching. But a lot of people don't do it,
And
is the
I
problem.
thank you. I was thinking back to the beginning of the pandemic, and I was working with a few professors who just needed support in their online teaching. And I also spoke with a lot of students, and I heard that very few professors actually were aware of the fact that the students did get zero chance to speak to another student during a full semester. because
Oh,
they
that's
joined
really
the Zoom
soft.
space and there was a lecture and the professor asked, do you have any questions? Surprise, nobody had a question. Or maybe the
Yeah,
first row student who always has a question
yeah,
asked.
yeah,
This the idea that a student could actually appreciate turning to their neighbor, to their virtual neighbor, and just have a
yeah,
conversation amongst students was so alien to them.
yeah,
And I
yeah,
think it broke many students.
yeah, I think so too. And that's why we developed these community building resources because we were like, professors won't know necessarily how to build community in a class. And the students were stuck at home. They didn't have other ways to meet people and socialize. They had to socialize in class. They were first year, second year college students who didn't have any friends in college for a whole year.
Yeah. And there's a
Where
power
was that going
dynamic.
to happen?
Yeah, if you're
Go.
just joining uni, who how many will have the courage to actually suggest to revolutionize the system?
Yeah.
And professors who told them they never signed up for that.
Yeah.
I was a facilitator before and I never used a Zoom breakout room before the pandemic, didn't have a Zoom license. So very vulnerable moment for everyone.
Yeah.
According to you, what makes a workshop fail?
What makes a workshop fail? Oh, wow. Um, I would say when the facilitator isn't attuned to the participants is the main thing, or the situation where there is a person in the room who exerts their power over the facilitator's power to derail the agenda, which can be really, really bad. Even if the facilitator has a very strong personality and manages, that person can really, really spoil the mood. And it's pretty unpredictable when that could happen.
Has it
But I
happened to
think
you? Can you share
it
in
has happened to
an
me. I
experience?
survived it really well. I can tell you what it is because I've told this story to a lot of people. So I was giving a workshop as part of my job to a department in my university. The department chair had not prepared people for what was coming, but he said he had. But it turns out he sent an email, so they may not have read it. And so the person misunderstood what I was going there to do, but I didn't realize that. And then they started not challenging me in a normal way, but sort of insulting me in an academic way. You know the way academics will say something that sounds like it's just an academic critique, but it's actually just a downright insult, like how dare you do this? And he started to do that. And I had a good response because what he was insulting me for was not what I was doing. So I wasn't like personally offended, but he was very rude. And then other people sort of tried to help calm him down, but they didn't do it very well. And then he calmed down a little bit. And then I went on with the workshop. And then towards the end, he came up with another way of insulting me that was hilarious. And so I responded in a funny way because he was saying something really hilarious. Like I showed him the video of something. He's like, why are you showing us that video? I'm like, whatever video I show you, you'd ask me, why are you showing me that video? Like, what am I going to say to convince you? And he goes, why didn't you show us the video of this person? I was like, because he's dead. And then he goes, but you have him cited in your email signature. So I was like, what's your name? And then the guy froze and he didn't want to tell me his name. And my colleagues who were sitting at the back watching, they're like, he was afraid that you were going to report him. I'm like, no. My other colleagues, like, he was just surprised that you're being friendly. Because when I found out who he was someone I had seen on Zoom with a black box. I had never seen his face. I'm like, oh, we were in a workshop together earlier that morning or the day before or something like that. Oh, so it's nice to meet you. So he was like, what? Why is she being nice to me? After that session, so first of all, I would consider that session as a problematic day. I think, I don't know if anyone listened to anything I said after he started insulting me, but it went, it went. And then later well, someone texted me an apology for what that other person did. Someone else sent me a long email and offered to buy me coffee and to apologize for what happened. But the point is that person never apologized, and I was also thinking, my colleagues and I were thinking, what if the session had been in our department and we were hosting it? What
Mm.
do you do when someone comes into your space and insults you in your own space? But that's not what was happening. It was their space. So someone else, now that I think about it, I'm the facilitator, but someone else is the host in that space. And that person who's the department chair should have stepped up, but if they don't have a strong personality, and that other person is like a really, or maybe they knew it would escalate more if they, I don't know what it was.
Which makes me realize that being a facilitator is a very vulnerable space that we often forget about, actually. That if we are stepping into someone else's space, we have prepared to the best of our knowledge.
I didn't do good enough pre-design. We had met with one person who told us what was needed in the department. We thought we were ready, but we should have met with more people. And you know, I've thrown this challenge at a lot of different facilitators, and some of them talked about there are power issues going on outside of my session that I should have been aware of, and that there maybe people were forced to be there and they should have known it was optional, for example, or I should have met with the most problematic people to understand their concerns privately, or they as a department should have met without me first to hash out their disagreements before I can. Like there's so many things, so many insights I've gotten by telling this story to people. And in the end, really, it is a systemic issue whose depth I did not understand. I mean, I understood, but I didn't understand how much it was upsetting that particular person to the extent that he wasn't willing to listen to what I was going in to say, which was separate from that issue, but related, you know. But you can't tell someone, forget everything else you know about this topic because I'm here to just teach you this part, you know?
Yeah. And it also shows the complexity. You can prepare for difficult situations, and you never know.
Yeah.
You never know what's triggering a certain person in that moment. Can always happen. And sometimes having a conversation before can make it easier, sometimes make this worse. Although I must say that for a high stakes workshop, I have conversations with every participant beforehand. And I ask them, what needs to happen for you to believe this will be a waste of your time? And it's fantastic what they come up with, all the examples of when it went wrong previously. And then all I have to do is to avoid all of that.
Nice. That's like
They
playing
feel
trizz
really
with
hurt
them.
when I ask them that.
I like this a lot. I am gonna do that. Thank you.
Yeah, because then if the person then says, oh, if you try to teach us something, then you know, oh, okay, so there have been issues with that.
Yeah.
Or if only Tom speaks all the time, or if Steve starts to nag as always, or if we turn it, you get all the old stories. It's wonderful.
Nice. I like that a lot. You get to know people.
Yeah. And what would you consider as your number one facilitation challenge after so many years of facilitating?
Oh, wow. What is my number one facilitation challenge? Actually, I'm going to say something that I don't want people to know this about me, but I'm just going to make myself vulnerable and say it. And I'm sure I'm not the only one. Is when we're having very, very intense conversations about topics I'm interested in, not just a general topic. And then it's a very interactive session. I can lose focus for a little bit and I can't remember what people just said. And I hate it when that happens. I'm happy when it's one of the recorded sessions because I can go back and listen later. But when it's not one of those and I'm facilitating alone without a co-facilitator, it can be really challenging because you're like, how do I acknowledge what this person just said really respectfully and not sound like, oh, thank you for your contribution and move on when they've said something like really important.
I hear you. Yeah, especially when you're, so I'm saying this now to make sure that you know that you're not the only one. And thank you for sharing, because I think many will now say, yes, happens to me and I feel bad. And there are parts of me that want to say it's normal because we have to be so on and so focused for such a long time. And there are these micro moments where our brain just decides to, oh, let me go there and think about the shopping and grocery list, right? Which has absolutely nothing to do with the conversation. But that's what happens with our brain. And what makes me feel bad in these situations is that I usually try to synthesize or paraphrase what a person has said, just to underline it and to give the group a different wording so that it sits better. And then if I generally do this for everyone, and then there's this one person, oh yeah, thank you for saying that.
Exactly.
Everyone knows that you have. And to be honest, every time this happens, it sounds as if it would happen every time. I wonder whether it wouldn't be more honest to actually admit it.
Say, yeah, I do sometimes. It depends on the audience. If there are people who know me well,
Yeah,
I would say it.
yeah,
And if it's a very high stake thing where me not listening was a problem, I could actually, could you repeat that? Because I lost focus for a second.
yes,
But in other situations, either it's not high stakes or nothing important is going to happen if I don't listen to it or whatever. I just let it go.
yeah.
But those situations that I just described are not that many,
Mm.
where it's really, really high stakes and the people know me well and it's safe to say that. There are not that many situations.
Although I love how you phrased it, can you please repeat because I lost focus? Which is everyone will
Yeah.
understand it.
Yeah.
And because any other way, you don't want to make it about yourself in that moment.
Mm,
And I think that's the slippery slope. So how can you still leave it with the group and with them without making it about yourself? Oh, I was distracted. I'm so sorry. And then suddenly it's all about you.
yeah.
Although just one phrase, sorry, lost focus. Please give me
Yeah.
the, yeah,
Give me the gist of that again or something. Yeah.
yeah. We are not machines.
No, we're not. That's true. Although everybody's obsessed with AI these days, so that's always on my mind these days. And
Yes, and I I'm actually excited about the opportunity to collaborate with machines because it's yes, there's AI, and I recently put into one of the bots what makes a workshop fail. So, which is one of the standard questions that I ask every participant, every podcast guest. And this AI, this machine gave me the answer. Oh, this is actually a very difficult question to answer because everyone might perceive failure in a different way. But in general terms, we can say that a lack of preparation as well as too much power differences and group dynamics could bring a workshop to fail.
Mm.
I was like, what?
it's pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
It's really good. I got infatuated with I'm originally a computer scientist and I know how to do machine learning. My thesis was a neural network, so I know how to do this stuff.
Okay.
But natural language processing in the way that Google does it and so on was very early when I was an undergrad. And then I shifted my career completely, stopped doing this stuff, but I understand how it works.
Mm.
And I've been teaching digital literacies and showing my students all the things that AI can do. But then the shift from everything until ChatGPT was big. And I've actually used other text generating tools and they're not the same. They're not as good. It has a personality. I just wrote a blog post this morning and I said why ChatGPT is like a sweetheart. Because it does the tone of the way you said it, someone was talking about ChatGPT being mansplaining, but it's not what it does to me. It's actually quite humble. Like sometimes it'll say, I'm not really sure about this thing, but this is what I know. Or, oh, sometimes it will say, I'm a machine doing whatever. And so I am not capable of doing this. Like it knows its own limits. And this morning, I asked it a question related to interpretation of Islamic text, the Quran. And it said, I'm a machine. I cannot interpret a holy text because this is a very sensitive topic for Muslims.
Wow.
I was like, what?
It's even politically
What?
correct.
Yes, politically correct. I'm like, it's so American. But yeah, I sent this to my friends and I'm like, what?
Yeah.
So it's very interesting that way. But yeah, I think whoever programmed it gave it a tone that I like a lot. And I've tried it with helping me brainstorm workshop titles. And I used it with a professor before I did a consultation with him to help me think about how he might want to redesign his assignments and rubrics and syllabus. And Give me ideas for topics I could cover in my class. You know what? Google could have given me that because someone else might have talked about it before, but it kind of synthesizes it in a nice way and in its own words.
Yeah,
The workshop titles thing is really cool. Just like give me exciting titles for a workshop on 1, 2, 3. Give me an outline for a workshop on 1, 2, 3. It's not gonna be perfect, but it's gonna be something, and it takes a second or two.
exactly. And I think, and that's why I like the idea of the collaboration with bots is,
Yeah.
yes, the most difficult part is the coming up with something on a white page. And
Mm-hmm.
editing is actually easy. Editing someone else's work, you have something, you have some anchors, and then you can, like this, don't like that, and can fine tune it. And that's where talent comes in and where our time is used best for. So,
Yeah. It can be tricky though, because you may be boxed into whatever this AI bot was trained on, right?
mm,
So it isn't trained with an Egyptian voice. It is probably trained with a native speaker American British voice. And so how it writes, this is always one of the things I tell my professors, it's not going to sound like your students because it sounds like a native speaker, and our students are not native speakers. They shouldn't sound like that.
yeah.
But also, what kind of ideas does it bring in? How might that limit what I would have thought about on my own because I rely on it first? But honestly, it would you could say the same about Google, right? Do you try to remember things if you can just search for them on Google? Do you try to figure them out if Google might already know? Why not?
And
Why?
it
If it's not your area of expertise, then
and
this is a faster way. And
and we all have our unconscious biases. So
of
at least
course,
with the bot, I'm aware of the biases and the limitations and where it comes from.
not everyone, but yeah, we should be.
Yeah. And so even if we collaborate with another human being, we'll be confronted with biases and how they speak and where they have been trained, not by whom, but
True,
where. And
true.
and I think nowadays with Google and the filter bubble of what comes up when we Google some stuff, and what remains hidden,
Yeah.
that's dangerous. So I think,
Perpetuates your own biases for
mhm,
you, right? And
yeah,
you start thinking that's what Google says. Well, that's what Google wants thinks you want to
yeah,
hear.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
true.
I think the opportunity that I see is that it makes us more aware to think of these biases, to learn to ask the right questions. Because at the end of the day, it depends on the questions you're asking.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think these are the skills that we have to learn that actually also
Exactly.
make a great facilitator, right? It's not about the
Yeah.
answers, it's all about the question.
Oh my God, this what you just said there, speaking of facilitation, back to the topic of facilitation, is people think they're using the chat to engage participants, but they're not always asking a question that is of the type that someone can respond to in a split second in the chat. It either needs more time to think about, or it feels like they would look bad if they got it wrong, or it needs a paragraph and not a couple words. And then they ask people to write stuff in the chat and then they don't read it. It's like, why are you doing this? It's like you're performing engagement, but you're not actually engaging the participant, right?
Yeah, yeah. Interesting. I haven't thought of. Hmm, that's a nice NDB workshop. What kind of questions suit a chat engagement?
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's a very
My daughter,
particular
my
question.
daughter just woke up. I just need to tell her we're recording. Okay, my camera's on. All right. Okay, she's good.
Good. Yeah, there's so many layers to that. Um, and I think as I said, it's an opportunity to lift what we're doing to the next level with the AI because we can actually focus on the core skills
Yeah.
done by
So
machines.
what was the name of that thing that put them on the map? Because sometimes I do an activity where they annotate and put their place on the map
Yeah.
themselves. But if there's an activity that does it, a tool that does that, that would be cool.
Um,
Stream Live, is that what it is? Or is
I
that a
can tell you, stream alive.
Stream Alive?
Yes, and I think it's free. It's still free, and I hope to get the founders on the podcast.
Their first page is hilarious because it says, I love a disengaged audience, said no one ever.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's completely hilarious.
Nice.
All right, I'm signing up for this.
Maha, We are almost
Yes.
speaking for, yeah, almost 1.5 hours.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you would have liked to share that we didn't
Yes.
touch upon?
There is one thing. I want to tell you about Mid-Year Festival that we had last year, and hopefully we'll do another one this year.
Yes.
So other than virtually connecting, I have another space called Equity Unbound, which is again a grassroots thing. I co-founded it with Mia Zamora in the US and Catherine Cronin in Ireland, and it's a growing community of educators who care about equity and openness and connection online, right? And originally it was for our students to connect with each other, but it grew into these community building resources and all kinds of things. Last June, July, August, we organized something that we felt educators needed. They needed sort of a re-energizing and rejuvenation experience. And we looked at conferences that were being done online that were awful for the most part. And we're like, wait a minute, if it's virtual, why do we need to do it in 3 days? Nobody's traveling, everybody's at home, and everybody's got Zoom fatigue, and everybody's back to face to face. So nobody has time to sit in front of Zoom for a whole day. So we're like, we'll organize it over 3 months. June, July, August. Choose your own learning journey, different pathways. You can jump in and out wherever you want, and you can do it. Never have more than 3 sessions a day. Never have overlapping sessions. Why do I have to choose between sessions? Just spread out. And we organized it and we gave it a price. You could either pay for 1 month or pay for the 3 months. And we had discount codes and we had promo codes for people who couldn't afford it at all. And we invited people from all over the world and we did it. And we had Slack in between. We had a little bit of asynchronous, but most of it was synchronous stuff. And we organized it and it was incredible. We called it mid-year because we had people from the global south. So for them, it wasn't summer, right?
Mm,
Not the global south, I mean, south of the equator,
yeah.
southern hemisphere.
Southern Hemisphere.
So yeah, so you're in Australia right now, so you'd understand this.
Yeah.
um, so we called it Mid-Year Festival, and we also had things for kids. And
Nice.
we had things that we called all ages. So you could bring your grandma, you could bring your child. And my child had a great time. They played Minecraft and we did theater, reading theater, and it was,
And what was
and we also
the
had like
overall
regular,
purpose? So why
the
did you
overall
do that?
purpose the overall purpose is that educators needed rest and rejuvenation and they needed something to enjoy and learn, like people like us who like to learn but you want to enjoy the learning and do it in community. So we had sessions where we're just building community and also learning about activities that we could do in our classes. We had sessions about open education and digital literacy so people could learn how to do that but have conversations with each other around that. We had tracks on ungrading so that if people wanted to try not to grade they could try that. We had things that were more fun and we had things that were more, yeah, let's have these serious conversations in a safe space. Let's have conversations about healing and trauma, and let's have conversations about, writing reflectively and writing creatively. And
And I find it interesting because it's the exact opposite of the Never Done Before festival, where
I
everything
know,
happens in 24 hours and there's just too much happening at the same space. So there's always a
yeah,
fear of missing out. And
mm,
I think there are pros and cons for both. So I think if you
mm-hmm,
spread it out, then you if people are really, I think for the space of educators, especially over summer when there's no uni, so there's really
mm-hmm,
the time to take for this, and
mm-hmm,
it's continuous education.
mm-hmm,
And I think for facilitators or the general public, maybe it's difficult to engage groups over such a long time, or you need
mm-hmm,
such a big group of participants to fill all these sessions and to have the momentum running.
mm-hmm.
And
So, I mean, the other flip side of it is back to what we were saying earlier, is that some people really benefited from the reflection time between
mm,
sessions.
yes,
Being able to spend time to absorb, but then come back and re-engage
yeah.
versus absorb it on your own and then never see these people again.
And I think we that's why we had the after the very first NDB festival, we had the afterglow, where every day
Yeah,
of the next month we would have one workshop per day. And this was
yeah,
actually the time where the community was built because we
yeah,
saw each other almost every day. So it felt like
yeah,
at the end of the month
yeah,
we felt like good friends.
yeah. I bet. But this time it wasn't every day, right?
There was every day.
There was?
Yeah.
Ah, I missed that for some
I think
reason. I mean, I
almost
was planning to come to some of them, but I don't think I realized there was one every day.
I think
But yeah,
the
but I already
most
came to a lot of them anyway.
yeah. And what I like about the 24 hours, it's like a little bit like the breakout room. There's never enough time. And
Mhm.
still there's a very specific energy that is created because there is no time, and
Mhm.
many try to squeeze in as much as they can in the waking time.
Yeah,
So I slept for
yeah.
20 minutes in
Oh my God.
over 24 hours.
Wow, that's
And it was an
crazy.
entire different experience to go through the cycles of being totally tired and still hosting a workshop.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah. So let us know
Yeah,
if
that
it
was
happens
incredible.
again.
I'm planning to. Yeah, inshallah. But did you just close the marketplace? So I have to tell you some other way.
Yes. Yes. You let me know, you tag me
Yeah, we'll do that.
in email.
Yeah. I will do that, inshallah. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, Miriam.
Thank you. Wonderful conversation. Love geeking out. Facilitation and tools and how to's.
I enjoyed it so much and I learned so much.
Same here. And I guess in the audience they will sit there with their little notepad. Wonderful.
All right.
Thank you for
Okay.
generously sharing.
Thank you for having me. And I'm so looking forward to seeing you a lot in the next few months, inshallah.